having a party. We are having a little of his favorite music in the background, which was the Glenn Miller music. And I'm delighted to see you all. Thank you. John?
My name is John Barron, and at this moment I'd like to invite all of you to make yourself comfortable while I spend some time telling you about some fun memories I had at Chuck. Since I met him playing varsity basketball at the University of Chicago in the 1948-49 season. Can you, everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay. Over the years, Charlie would express himself privately to me about his love and caring for his family, how proud he was of his beautiful home, the accomplishments, Mary as a mother, and the wonderful time they had traveling around the globe. He was very proud of the accomplishments of his daughters, Rebecca, who was a graduate of the School of Northwestern School of Journalism and is a writer, and Rachel, who was a postgraduate at Columbia and Harvard University, and a businesswoman in international economics. He was close to his father-in-law, Daniel. Daniel was a businessman in Libya, and then when he was innocently jailed to Gaddafi for over 6 months, Chuck went with Mary's sister Cynthia and was very instrumental in getting him released and brought to the United States. Chuck went to Hirsch High School, where he played varsity basketball, and then when he graduated there, he went to Wilson Junior College, got bored, quit, and then joined the Army. He served in the famous 82nd Airborne and jumped 15 times as a paratrooper. Then Chuck, according to Chuck, one of the luckiest and most important happenings of his life, he was admitted to the University of Chicago. During the first year, he felt, like many of us at that time during the Hutchins era, he didn't belong there until his advisor told him not to worry since he placed in the upper 25% of the entering class. He graduated from the college in 2 years and then entered law school. Once he made up his mind, Chuck was a determined individual, sometimes to the point of being stubborn. If you look at it, there's a picture over there I have of the 1948-49 team on display. You'll notice that he's missing. During that year, in the basketball season, after he had earned a C letter the previous year, with 2 games remaining in the season, he quit the team. Chuck was upset with the coach for not playing him in a game against Cole College. And so he decided that it was more important to spend all of his time studying for his law school exams. He passed them and then later graduated. Charlie was an active member and very well-liked member of the Psi Epsilon fraternity on campus. He was actually instrumental in acting as a matchmaker in marriage for at least, I know at least 4 people in the fraternity. At that time, the chapter had somehow, through contacts in the service and so forth, had obtained telephone numbers to the American Airlines Stewards School at Midway Airport. And the nurses' dorm at the university, who came from the University of Wisconsin and Minnesota to study for a term in the lying in. So because of his charm and sense of humor, he was designated by us to call the dorms every 5 weeks or every 3 months when classes changed and arrange dates or parties. So that's how that happened.
That was before me.
Yes, it was before marriage. Quite a time before that. Charlie was dedicated to his profession and immensely enjoyed his work as an attorney, insurance and criminal law, working long hours and sometimes 7 days a week. He reminded me of a country doctor. Chuck and I had standing tennis day each Sunday at 7:30 for about 40 years. And it was not uncommon for him to call me at 7 o'clock in the morning on Sunday and call for our tennis because he had to bail somebody out at 26 in California or in South Holland. He took criminal cases from persons he knew could not afford his services and often obtained little or no compensation for his efforts. Yet it was important to him to serve his clients to do the best for them. He was proud of a case. Also, he took all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court on appeal and won. What endeared him to his friends was his uncanny sense of humor, in my opinion, rivaling that of Don Rickles or Johnny Carson. Somehow, as some of you well know, the Beloy's Cafeteria in Hyde Park is a meeting ground for many Chicago celebrities. Chuck, Bob Hartfield, and Henry Stein had met there each Sunday for breakfast after tennis. And on two different occasions, Chuck would once walked up to Reverend Jesse Jackson, or the other time the stud Sterkel introduced himself, and within 45 seconds he had him chuckling and laughing. He had a quality of making people laugh at themselves, humanizing their weaknesses. At Beloy's one Sunday, too, a long line of customers were waiting impatiently to get breakfast served because of poor service. After a few minutes, Charlie had the whole line laughing, including the persons who were providing the poor service. Team members of 1947-48 varsity basketball team relayed another story about Chuck. The team played DePaul University and was trounced. Johnny Sharp, playing for Chicago, had what was considered the longest shot in basketball with some wanting inaccuracy. As the team, after the game, gathered in the locker room, Chuck turned to Johnny and said, "John, if you had made 10% of your shots, we would have won that game running away." Even John chuckled at this comment along with the team. A few years ago, Chuck had hip surgery, and it was left him actually with a dropped foot. We now, at this point, we began playing instead of singles, doubles with Bob Hartfield and Henry Stein. At times, Chuck had difficulty approaching the net, and shots which were coming to him were not infrequently cut off by me before me dashing to the net and cutting off Charlie. Feeling that he was being left out of the game too often, before each game he would remind Bob and Henry that he's playing handicap with a flying pull-lock. Let's see. There was another incident. Chuck was, I think he knew every policeman person on the south side of Chicago. And this was 1968, and there had just been the incident of rioting at the Hilton Hotel, by students toward policemen and upset Mayor Daley, if you recall that. And they had also occupied the administration building here for one day. The university didn't let them get away with much more time. But shortly after that, I was coming down Dan Ryan, and the policeman pulled me over and gave me a ticket for speeding. And I said, well, I was on my way to the university playing tennis. And I had been in my shorts and University of Chicago t-shirt. So I gave Chuck the ticket, and he says, oh my gosh, I know that policeman. So when we came to court, they started talking to each other, and later Chuck told me, he said, who are you hanging out with? The policeman tells the Chuck. And he says, I stopped this guy, and he came out with this University of Chicago t-shirt and shorts, and the first thing I did is step back 6 feet. Needless to say, Chuck said something to him that allowed me to go ahead and not get the ticket. I guess there are a few things that Dave Dickman, Dave was another colleague at the University of Chicago on basketball player with Chuck. He couldn't come here today because of emergency reasons, but he wanted to say a few words, and I'll just read a few of the comments. I first met Chuck in the fall of 1947, the year we entered the University of Chicago. I still remember what he was wearing. He had his Air Force jumping boots on with the GI issue. Green dungaree pants, which were tucked into his almost knee-high leather boots, pockets on the side. He looked like he was wearing knickers. I did not find out much until later that he was in the well-regarded 82nd Airborne outfit and made 18 successful jumps in his career. When I find this out, I said to him, "You are a better man than I am. I would not have the guts to jump from an airplane." Chuck said to me, "I loved every second of those jumps. Simply put, to jump from an airplane was just plain thrilling." Recently, I told Dick Burdell, my brother-in-law, who was an attorney, that Chuck had died. Dick said to me, "That's too bad. I always enjoyed working with him. Against him, he was always prepared, straightforward, and pleasant." At one of their legal contests, after the case was over, Dick gave Chuck some advice on how Chuck handled the case, and Chuck thanked Dick for the advice. Shortly thereafter, the case was over, and I saw Charlie, and he told me how grateful he was about the advice that he received from Dick Burdell. Chuck slipped badly in the last few years, and one of the reasons I think he was pretty well depressed was there were two things that he because of physical disability, he had to give up tennis, and then his work. He finally had to retire completely, and he was such a busy guy at it, I don't think he could find himself after that. Well, anyway, I'll just pass, if anybody else wants to come up and say a few words, I'd be welcome to have you do that.
Ray, great punch.
Hi, I'm Ray Bush. I haven't known Charlie as long as some of you have. I've known him for about 49 years or 50 years. Because I didn't meet Charlie until 1949 after law school. We were classmates. And Charlie and I spent a lot of time together, and my recollections of Charlie are just wonderful. He was always forthright, honest. If he said something, he meant it. And you could always count on Charlie to do what he said he would do. Didn't always agree with him, but you knew that he was doing what he thought was right. And when you consider how much he had done and where he started from, his accomplishments were really quite great. Now, I have lots of personal memories. They're very similar to what John had said. My wife loved Charlie, but she couldn't be here today. But she wanted to remember him with a little poem she wrote. So I'll read that for her. This is from my wife, Janice. Remembering Charlie is recalling the days when fun and laughter was the craze. The halls of Sayou were full of cheer, for guys like Charlie spent their times there. The life of the party, he enjoyed all, and whatever he was, you'd have a ball. His party at home was like none others, and was shared by all, friends and brothers. His memory lingers for all around, for now we don't have that happy sound of optimism and cheers that he portrayed in the field of life of which he played. Goodbye, dear friend. We'll remember the days of old Sayou and sing a praise for your spirit to remain and always hail to cheer us on the long, long trail. From my wife, Janice.
I have something to say. Excuse me. John, you
Start. My name is John Davey, and I first met Chuck in kind of an interesting circumstance. My father was the dean of students here in the college, and he brought me in swaddling clothes to see the USC basketball team play at a very young age that I was. But on our way out one night, an altercation started, and it was right in front of us. And my father was terrified because a fellow on the other team was getting in a fight, and a fellow named Ray Freark had started this fight. A fellow some of you guys know. And Charlie, in an unusual situation, was pulling Ray off of the fight. And I met him because I got hit in the process of this and everything. And I got to meet Charlie, and that's the first time I met him. It's interesting. My father seemed to know him very well, but as head of the disciplinary committee, it was not that way that my father had met him. He had met Charlie in better ways than that. The next time I met Charlie was when I went to University High School, and the basketball coach there, Joe Stamp, gave me the great privilege of, as a 10th grader at U High, having a locker over at Bartlett Gym, which meant you got to play basketball Saturday mornings, 4-on-4, cross court. Charlie was there every Saturday, I was there every Saturday. And I had never realized, you know, I had thought Coach Norgren had made a mistake back at the USC by not playing Charlie in that co-game, but I didn't realize it until I had to play against him. And I was a young kid, and I never realized how much determination and how much speed and how much competition he could provide on the court. And he was terrific as kind of a mentor to me, and we seemed to be guarding each other every day. And finally, I got a little better, and he faded a little bit as years went on, and he had just difficulty that I didn't have. I had a locker at Bartlett. He was dressing at the Sayu house and running through the cold winter to get over there. And Chuck was a lot of fun for me, and one of the things you do in this 4-on-4 basketball is you call your own fouls. In other words, the 4 people, if I think somebody fouled me, I say you fouled me, we take the play over. And that really can make for some interesting discussions. And Chuck one day explained to me that what this was government, because you have to learn how to administer yourself. First of all, the way you pick teams, which you came up, and the first 4 guys to hit a free throw were on one team, the next 4 guys were the next team, and if you didn't hit till after that, you had to wait and play. And then you called the fouls, and he explained to me one time when I was getting kind of excited, feeling that I was getting fouled and we were not getting the recognition, and he pointed out that, you know, if we argue over this, we don't get to play. That there's a motivation for settling these disputes because we still want to play. And if we're up there arguing for 10 minutes, that's 10 minutes out of our time up there, which is very limited. And I really appreciate it. It was really an interesting lesson from him. Now, I was also fortunate enough, after my father had left being chairman of the disciplinary committee, the Sayus admitted me to their fraternity. I was considerably younger, but it's a really interesting mix of people. People ought to appreciate that. First of all, I entered the university as an early entrant. That means after 2 years of high school, they had this early entry program. And here I am joining a fraternity where half of the people have served in Korea and the Army, and most of them are in graduate school. I think our pledge class alone took the average age down from 31 to 26 or something. And so it was a real experience to have this broad stripe of people there on all sorts of ages. And Charlie was really one of the guys who was really helpful for all of us young guys because he had a lot of history, he had a lot of street moxie on the south side of Chicago, which was kind of helpful, though I came from the street. So Chicago wasn't the streets of Hyde Park, it wasn't the streets of real knowledge down here. And Charlie was very, very helpful for all of us, and we always enjoyed him. Now, I would tell you also sort of about another experience with Chuck. I also went to law school only at a later time, and I had a fellow in my law class who was graduating, and he was planning to go do personal injury and criminal work on the southeast side of Chicago, in South Chicago. And so I mentioned to Chuck, you know, this guy's going to come down, he's going to practice law for himself down there. Chuck said, it's never going to work. We got enough guys now, he's going to lose his shirt, tell him to go into something corporate. It was about 4 years later when I ran into Chuck, and I said, you know, how's my friend doing down there? He says, you know, Ed Verdoliak's a really good guy. He's given me a number of cases, referred to me. I really like the guy. Another thing to tell you about Chuck is over a number of years I've been very active, and it seems like all the same organizations he has. I've been running the Order of the Sea for a while, and it is such a pleasure when you have at a school like the University of Chicago so many people who denigrate sports and denigrate some of the old standards. Chuck was very, very loyal to the Order of the Sea, came to our Hall of Fame dinners, came to our senior reception, came to basketball games every year. I mean, this is, at this school, you have to realize, even today, it's a fight to have athletics be important to the school. And Chuck was a great asset and a great friend of ours on the Order of the Sea. 2 years ago, I hosted a luncheon down at the University Club for a number of people who are here, a whole group of SIUs. It would be impossible for me to explain how much SIU meant to me, but you'll get it from other people. So what I would like to do, anyway, in closing, is indulge you people for a moment in asking you to help me remember Chuck in an interesting way. We had a cheer at SIU. SIUs may remember it. It's a pretty simple cheer. What it is we go sigh, 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 SIU, sigh, one, SIU, sigh, one, SIU. Now, will you go along with me with this?
I was with you for the first 3 slides.
Now this
The boys, stand up and do it, the boys do it. The guys. Yeah, the guys. That's how you
anyway, we got some SIUs here. You remember this, guys? I mean, it's better than, you know, the alternative is I'd ask them to sing a SIU song. And so if you look at it this way, I think we have the right level of voices and everything. So come on, guys, John and Jimmy, you guys get ready here now. Are you ready? Sigh, 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 SIU, sigh, one, SIU, sigh, one, SIU.
Another G. Collins.
Hi. Thank you for the cheer. My dad always said that when he goes, he doesn't want it to be a sad occasion. He wants it to be a big party. So I think enough of this, and I like the cheer. I'm my father's youngest daughter, and I want to thank you for coming. It's lovely to see so many people from all walks of my father's life today. But you know sides of him that I've never seen, and as his youngest daughter, I probably know sides of him that you've never seen. I think I was the one who was supposed to be his son, and he always said that I was the toughest kid on the block. Now, this may or may not have been true, but when your dad says it, you still sort of believe it. So thanks, Dad. He taught me to play gin rumming and chess, and he never let me win. I know this is true. He was always miffed and proud when I beat him. It was delicious. I learned early on that my tears would reduce my father to mush, and he would grant my every wish. But then, he used to tell stories about how judges would upbraid him and his fellow attorneys in court. And he would say how the inexperienced ones would tear up and leave the courtroom, and sometimes even cry. He'd take them aside and say, "You don't like how they talk to you? Well, let me tell you, they talk to me that way, and you gotta come back swinging." So I decided that I was always gonna come back swinging. And it's a tough world out there, and some people like to use intimidation to keep other people down. And in international business and policy work, I've seen a lot of that. Sometimes you have a cruel boss, an unethical counterparty, nasty interviewer, and I have to say, when I was in those situations, I would literally think, you know, I think my dad is tougher than you. I think my dad maybe is even smarter than you. And even worse, I would think, despite that, I think my dad is nicer than you. Think about it. This is a guy who grew up with virtually nothing during the Great Depression. He enlisted in the Army after the brutality of the war. He jumped out of airplanes. He put himself through college and law school in 5 years, showed up for trial every day of his life in the toughest courts of the country, and built an entire law practice with nothing but his own smarts and the shirt on his back. But when he argued, he never hit below the belt, and he always stuck to his ethics and his principles. He was generous to a fault with his family and his friends. He adopted stray cats. And I thought everyone in the world was like that. Now, when I got out into the world, I learned that most definitely that wasn't true. So thank you, Dad, for giving me an example of being who I want to be when the world tries to push you in a different place. The most potentially intimidating man I've ever known always told me I was the toughest kid on the block. That's a great gift. It just made sense. He was the first person in his family to go to college, become a lawyer, jump out of an airplane, travel to Tanzania, Nepal, Timbuktu, and Moscow, to only name a few examples. I'm not sure anything I will do will ever outshine what my father very quietly did for himself and his family and his friends. That's fine with me. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chuck Dundas. I'm Chuck's nephew, the son of his sister. I have a little historical information. I'm sort of like the family historian. And then I have some memories that I remember about my uncle growing up. Charles Edward Lindell was born March 18, 1928, to Carl Jewel Lindell and Ruth Elizabeth Arbogast. Jewel was a first-generation Chicago American, born to Swedish immigrants, and Ruth was also born in Chicago, the granddaughter of German immigrants. They were married in 1923 and had their first child, June, my mother, Junie Lane, in 1925, and Chuck was born 3 years later. I only remember a few stories about my grandparents, but I do remember that they were hardworking people. I remember my grandmother telling us how she used to work for $1 a day during the Great Depression, and how much that dollar meant to the family. My mother also told me that my grandfather used to have crackers and coffee for breakfast almost every day during that time. That's what they had to do to survive. This was instilled in Chuck and his sister June at an early age. And I know that Chuck and my mother were very close throughout their life. And I'm sure they fought as kids, but I know that they had disagreements, but they were always stayed close, even up to my mother's passing about 5 years ago. I never knew much about my uncle's early life other than the things my mother told me. At some point, they moved from Chicago to Minneapolis. Chuck attended grammar school in his first couple of years of high school in Minneapolis before moving to Chicago. He graduated from Hirsch High School in 1946 and was a basketball star all 4 years in high school, earning letters in each year. He enlisted in the Army on April 10th of the same year at the age of 17. And was a member of the 376 Parachute Field Artillery Battalion of the 82nd Airborne. I'm trying to imagine my own 17-year-old son jumping out of an airplane. They'd rather sit in front of video games these days. He was honorably discharged on October 10, 1947, after serving his country for 18 months. During that time, Chuck excelled again in basketball and became a star in the division's basketball league, and leading his team to a division runner-up in the league championship. In 47, he was selected as a first-team forward to the All-82nd All-Star squad. At the age of 18, he was the youngest member of that 10-man All-Star squad. At a height of 5'10" and a hefty 142 pounds. He was also the lightest member of that team. As I looked through several of Chuck's old basketball photos last week at Mary's house, she mentioned to me that Chuck, in Chuck's own words, you could always find Chuck in the crowd by picking out the skinniest legs. Chuck returned home to Chicago after his discharge and at some point began attending school at the University of Chicago. Again, Chuck excelled in basketball. He was very proud of his basketball skills, and I'm sure his parents were also. I found several dozens of old newspaper clippings in both college and high school, and I would venture that his mother, Ruth, was doing some of the clipping in those days. In September 47, Chuck's sister June was married to Larry Dundas, my father. In a couple of years, they started having children. My older brother Mike in 59, myself in 51, and my sister Nancy in 54. We also have two other younger brothers, Stephen and David. My early years, my memories of Chuck were of a funny guy who made us laugh. That's what Chuck did. He was always joking around with us, and he had funny names he would always call us. He used to call me and my brother names like Herkimerk, and my sister was something like Miss Bates. She doesn't remember that. But we would wrestle. He would wrestle with us because that's what he did. That's what we did as little kids. My father was a couple years older than Chuck, and he used to wrestle with us at home. But when we got together at family gatherings, we always used to attack Chuck because he was kind of like fresh meat. The one thing I always remember about Chuck, as Rachel said, he was a generous person. When it came to Christmas or my birthday, we could always count on Chuck to come through with a big ticket item. Not a little truck or something like that. We're talking big chemistry set or, the erector set with the electric motors and all that stuff. When I was in high school, he gave me an expensive telescope that was my prized possession for years. When I got older, I remember Chuck used to read a lot of law books. He seemed to be always reading law reviews. I also noticed that he used to disappear from family gatherings regularly. If you looked around and didn't see Chuck, you knew where he was. He could be found upstairs in the spare bedroom, sacked out. It became a regular game for us to seek and find Uncle Chuck and attempt to rouse him. This was done as in a physical manner as possible that types and toddlers could do. The other relatives present at these family gatherings never reprimanded us and seemed to encourage us. A couple other stories I remember when I was about 12 or 13. I remember Chuck blurting out some sarcastic comment as a joke in front of my dad and I. And he used a word I'd never heard before and didn't learn the meaning of for several years till I went to college. My father sort of laughed and cringed at the same time, but I didn't think much of it. It's not a word that you would ever expect to use at a family gathering. But I think that's the way Chuck was. When I was a teenager, Chuck used to pay me $50 to come over and rake his house and sweep the leaves. He had several large mature oak trees on the lot, and back in the 60s, $50 was a lot of money. Thinking of that also reminded me of the time he ran over his own foot with the lawnmower. I always think about my uncle as being highly intelligent, but I don't know if he had a mechanical side to him. I also remember Chuck was younger. He lived in a high-rise on the lakefront across from the Museum of Science and Industry, probably just a few blocks from here. I used to love hanging out there at the family at gatherings, especially when I used to go and stay with my grandmother, and we would go visit Chuck and, just be the three of us. As I grew older, I saw a lot less of my uncle. I was, college, moving away. I lived in Peoria for several years. Chuck got married, finally, they said. He was busy raising his own family. And when I put this together, that's about as far as I got, because when I got older, I didn't really hang out with my uncle. I didn't know him as really a friend. He was a relative. And, there's more history there, but that could be told a lot better by other people, by his family and his friends. He was a generation ahead of me, but, I never got the chance maybe to go and hang out with him, just do something, A lot of his history, I didn't know a lot of things about Chuck until this past week that I started researching it. And so I guess the important thing to remember is I know we all love Chuck, and that's attested by all the people that have shown up today to help remember Chuck. That's all.
Beth Parsh, and I married a Psi U fraternity brother of all these wonderful people in the summer of 1988. And that was when I first met the Psi U group. Bill said to me in June, we're going to go down to the University of Chicago for a reunion weekend, and we're planning to go to the interfraternity sing, and we're going to have a great time. So I met the Psi U's and their wives, and found out that Bill had wonderful friends, really nice people who enjoyed a good time, and who have become my friends, I'm pleased to say. And I wanted to come here today because there are two impressions that I'm left with about Chuck. Since I didn't know Chuck when he was younger and in his really funny, mode, my impressions were he was this real straightforward, call a spade, tell it like it is person, and that kind of straightforward nature that we Swedish people have, I think. But anyway, he was, just full of energy and spirit. And when we were invited to Mary and Chuck's home for a party in South Holland, and we went there, and it was in the winter, I remember, and I just remember how really, really excited and pleased Chuck was to have us all there. It wasn't just like, oh great, I'm glad you could come, and he loved it. I mean, just really loved it. And then later when they moved to Dyer, they had us over for gathering there, and again, he just really, really enjoyed that. And so I was interested that somebody said earlier about how Chuck really loved a party, because I think he really enjoyed sharing it with his friends. And so that was my impression of Chuck. And then Bill died 2 years ago, but he had become a stroke victim in May of 2001, and then had another severe stroke a year later. And I'm not sure after which stroke, but Bill was flat on his back at Lutheran General Hospital and really could hardly speak or anything. I mean, very, very seriously ill. And I happened to be in the room when in walked Chuck one day in a suit and tie. Where's Billy? They always called each other Charlie and Billy. It was never Chuck and Bill. And where's Billy? I said, well, he's right here. And he said, well, I had to come and see Billy. He said, I just had to come and see Billy. And so I just realized what a caring person he was to have done that and driven up from the south side of Chicago to Park Ridge, where we lived and where the hospital was. And it really left such an indelible impression on me of, as a total package of how much he really cared about his friends. And I think that's a real blessing.
Thank
Just a few remarks. My name is Hank Stein. I've been a friend of Chuck since 1946.
Way before me, way before me.
That's right. Anyway, I went to South Shore High School. He attended Hirsch. I met him at Wilson Junior College. And Chuck and I were on the basketball team there, which was fun. He played basketball at Hirsch, I played at South Shore. But I was on the junior team, which meant I was only 5'8" or something like that. I think I've shrunk a little since then. Anyway, midterm, Chuck decided to join the service and left Wilson. I stayed for the whole semester. Then I joined the Army and had a great experience, and also got the GI Bill, as Chuck did. I attended the University of Colorado Boulder and graduated and came back, and Chuck was here at the university. I attended the UC also, the education department, had a great experience. Chuck went to law school, graduated, had done very well. We became very, very close friends. Played basketball at the part of the gym, played tennis at every court we could find. Correct, John? And my friend Bob, very good tennis players. Anyway, Chuck used to always ask me, why don't you join the Psi U house? I said, I can't join the Psi U house. He says, you can join, you're a graduate student or whatever. You're here at the school. I said, no, I was a ZBT at the University of Colorado. And the ZBT is a well-known fraternity. And I even got a job at the DVT house, and that's why I joined the DVT, because they offered me a job, even though I had a GI Bill, I still needed more money. Anyway, from that point on, Chuck and I became very, very close and very good friends. In fact, about 7, 8 years ago, we both had hip surgery at different hospitals on the same day. So that's a good connection. As it turned out, we still got to play handball, or he didn't play handball, but I did, tennis. Anyway, became a very close friend, and I admired him and his family, and I'm just glad to be here. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everybody for being here today, especially my friends, many of whom never really knew my dad. So thanks, guys, for coming, and thanks all of you who did know him. It means a lot to have you here. My dad was a joker. I think that's pretty clear. He was a funny guy who could keep everyone in stitches. But my dad also knew a lot of pain in his life, and he shared that pain with those closest to him, his family and his dearest friends. To know my dad was to know both sides of him, the comic and the tragic, the sacred and the profane. As my father's condition worsened at the end of his life, I must say that we as a family found ourselves dwelling on the loss and the sadness, grieving what was and what would never be. There were many tears at his bedside, and even as he slipped into a coma, we thanked my father for what he had given us. We assured him that his life had mattered and that he had made a difference beyond what he had been able to see. We weren't sure at that point what he was able to think, feel, and hear, and still we kept talking. And then we started laughing. For some reason, we began recalling the many quirks of my dad, the times he had us shaking our heads, often with embarrassment, but also with laughter. Like the time he picked up a fork in a nice restaurant and began scratching his back with it, as my mother, sister, and I watched in horror. The way he yelled, "Cripes!" and "My God!" at the TV while watching any Chicago sports team collapse in defeat. The dirty jokes and polite company, the way he could talk his way out of a speeding ticket, anywhere in Chicago it seemed. The way he'd say, "Mary, would you get the TV fixed? I shouldn't have to put up with this." Which told you everything you needed to know about his relationship with both the TV and my mom. And I said, "You know what, Dad? I think there is one thing that anyone who knew you could agree on unequivocally, and that is that there was never a dull moment when Chuck Lindell was around." And we, my mother, sister, and I, laughed hysterically, the way you sometimes do when it seems your only alternative is to cry. And it was at that very moment that my father opened his eyes, gazed intensely at us, and took his last breath. I know my father wanted to be sure that he left us with joy and laughter, as well as an awareness of life's pain and challenges, and he did. Life, after all, is never easy, not even for children. And what seems increasingly important to me as I age is the ability to find laughter and lightness even in the darkest situations. I'm reminded of the words of the poet George Santayana. "The world is not respectable. It is mortal, tormented, confused, deluded forever. But it is shot through with beauty, with love, with glints of courage and laughter. And in these the spirit blooms, struggling to the light amid the thorns." I think the same could be said of my dad.
I'm Tom Duncan. I'm Chuck's son-in-law, and I got to tell you, I'm very proud to have had Chuck for my father-in-law, and I miss him. Chuck was a man of conviction. You've heard some stories, and also a man of cars. He always had two great cars, BMW and a Mercedes, but then the Jaguar, a Mary's Jaguar. And one of the cars that he particularly loved was the two-seater Mazda Miata, which he liked to call the Red Rocket. Chuck wasn't the greatest driver, so he replaced that car with a more sturdy two-seater Mercedes. That's a pretty sweet car too. Cars have had an interesting, interesting part of my experience with Chuck. I think the second time I met him, I had to. He was driving me to a friend's house in Chicago. I didn't know Chicago at all. He was giving me a lift, and I was pretty nervous. I said to Rebecca beforehand, "What am I going to talk about with this guy?" She said, "Don't worry." And little did I know, he talked the whole time, told me a lot of great stories, and afterwards told Rebecca that I was a great conversationalist. So I had some opportunities to ride in the car with Chuck, and there were some really close moments where I have to tell you truly, he opened up to me and told me some stories about his youth that were pretty painful, and that I think had quite a bit of formative experiences for him. And I'm not going to go into relating those stories, they were private, but they gave me quite a bit of insight into who he is, who he was, how he became to be the person he was and the great father-in-law. I'd like to tell you just two quick stories that have something to do with cars and that demonstrate Chuck's conviction. One was I got a speeding ticket, and I tell you, I was not guilty. But I called on my father-in-law, the lawyer, to come represent me in Skokie, and he came up, and it was a brand new judge. And most of you probably know that if you have it was a red light, really, a yellow light. Most of you know if you have a lawyer come represent you in traffic court, it's a courtesy thing. The judge says, "Come on up, we'll give you a probation or whatever they call it, and let you off." And so Chuck came up, and we went up in front of the judge, and she said, "I'll hear this case." And he said, "What? This is ridiculous." And she said, "And now we're going to take a break." He was furious at this breach of etiquette here. And so we went out in the hall during the break, and the district attorney came up and said, "Mr. Lindell, would you be interested in bartering?" What do you call this? Some lawyer help me out with this term.
Plea bargaining.
Plea bargaining, thank you. With plea bargaining this, he said, "Plea bargain? I'm taking this to court. I don't care if he gets the electric chair." I was a little nervous that way. And I got to tell you, he did get me off, and I was pretty pleased with that. The other interesting story, I'm not sure if many of you might have heard this part of Chuck, but I thought it was a really telling part of who he is. He practiced on the south side, and he practiced in some pretty rough areas at times. And he told me one time that he was driving down the street, and this was not more than 10 years ago, probably in his red Rocket, and he saw a gang beating up a guy on the sidewalk. They had some guns pulled, and one kid being beaten up by a bunch of others. He pulled the car up onto the sidewalk, threw open the door and said, "Get in." All these gang members stood there aghast that anybody would have the nerve to do this. But Chuck is a guy who did have the nerve to do it. The guy got in the car, pulled off the street, drove him away. That is a man you can respect, and that is why I'm really proud to call Chuck Lindell my father-in-law. Thank you very much.
Well, I know, Jack, I know. Please. I'm finding out things about my husband I didn't know.
Good afternoon, I'm Jack Noble. I'm representing the South Holland contingent. Our families have been very close. We met through our children attending Morgan Park Academy. But I really met Chuck. Some people said years. I can tell you the exact time and date. It was 11 a.m., March 5, 1971. The reason I remember that is that we had just built a home. Lots of things had gone wrong with the home, but we had to move in anyway. So I'm standing there in my driveway with 2 trucks of furniture arriving, nowhere to put them, and Chuck arrives and says, "I'm Chuck Lindell, would you like to play tennis?" Needless to say, we didn't play tennis that day, but I played tennis with Chuck every Saturday for approximately 35 years. Chuck was very competitive. I suppose I should just say ditto and go and sit down, because Charles E Lindell, that's quite a mouthful. We all knew him as Chuck. Chuck was tough, he was rough, he was abrasive, sometimes he was rude, and that was his good parts. And don't take that badly, because I love Chuck. But in the practice that Chuck had, these were attributes that you needed to succeed. And nobody denied Chuck was an extreme success at the job he did. Not only was it a success in his practice, he was a success as a person within the practice. Because Chuck was ethical, he was honest, and he was very, very hardworking. Chuck was also aggressive and competitive. You heard how he was so proud of his athletic prowess. He wasn't the usual picture of a basketball player, 7'5" and 300 pounds, but he still was so aggressive and competitive he could manage to play basketball in a very competitive status, and of that he was very proud. He played tennis the same way. Chuck would never give up until the last point was played. Sometimes he wasn't too happy when he was playing. I had a few close haircuts from tennis rackets. And I think Wilson Company were kept in business by Chuck's racket abuse. But he wouldn't give up until the last point was played and he either won or lost. Many times he'd play a good shot and by some luck I'd get it back. And I don't know if Errol's here, but his comment was, "Errol wouldn't have got that back." But inside that tough shell, there's another Chuck. There was a very loyal Chuck. If you were a friend of Chuck's, you were a friend for life. He was very proud of his family, he was very proud of his friends. Chuck was also reliable. If Chuck said he'd do something, he would do it. You could rely that whatever he had promised to do would be taken care of. And as been said earlier today, Chuck was generous. Not only generous with money, generous with himself, with his time, and I respect him. I loved him as a friend, and that's it, Chuck, I shall remember. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Irv Feinberg. In the galaxy of his friends, I'm in there somewhere. Chuck and I knew each other for over 50 years. Everything has been said about him, but the thing I want to emphasize is his warm side, soft side. When we adopted our first two children, Chuck handled the adoption. Chuck wrote my first will, and Chuck got me out of trouble a couple of times. All the boys have been touched by him. I have 4, and he's gotten them all out of jail, I'll admit that. We haven't seen each other a lot in the last several years due to circumstances. All I can say is, from the Feinberg boys, Uncle Charlie, thank you, and goodbye.
My name's Carl Rosika. I'm accountant and tax preparer for Charles E Lindell. I hope I know all of him. I'm not sure, but he was a very loyal client, very loyal friend. He liked to tell jokes that perhaps were not appropriate within the office, but everybody realized that he meant well and his humor was then accepted. I would go every year, have to close out his corporation for the year and determine what his salary should be to take advantage of most of the tax laws that are in effect. I'd make the calculations, determine what withholdings he should have to cover his income that was not through Charles E Lindell Limited, and he would always say the same thing. This is all I have? This is all I'm going to get? And he'd get very irritated, and he'd say, Mary, the secretary, Mary Tupiak, get in here. You know, are you sure you have everything, or is everything reconciled? Have you done everything? Yes, I have. I can't believe this is all the money I'm going to get. So, and he'd call up his investment person, get some information. If it was a male, you know, Charles E Lindell, I want that information right away. If it was a soft female on the female voice, hello. You know, take your time, whatever information you can possibly get. Really like it. He was a very loyal client, a very loyal friend. There's not too many of all the clients that have been working for myself since 1976. He's one of the few who always told me that he appreciated the work that I did. And that means more than giving a bill and collecting a fee. He would pretend like he'd be irritated about various matters, and I would take him over to my favorite picture of Mr. Lindell, which, by the way, I'm 57. It was only a couple of years ago that I felt comfortable to call him Chuck. And it was mostly out of respect, not because I was fearful. But my favorite picture, when he'd get real irritated and agitated, I would take him to the picture with him with the orangutan, the kind, gentle leader, Chuck Lindell. So it's a very important part of my life, and I appreciate it all. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is David Robertson, and I have not had the opportunity to know Chuck Lindell for that long as most of you people here, just in about 15 years ago. I met him while we were traveling together with him, and we just put together by Mary. And he and I had something very much in common. We both loved salt in our food. So he used to carry a salt shaker in his pocket everywhere he went. Chuck was really a diamond in the rough, like one day Dr. Noble called him. And during one of these trips is where we showed his great heart, his great generosity, and helped me through a hard time. I'd like to say that we're going to miss him very much and that I truly love the man. Thank you.
This is the other Mary in his life.
My name is Mary Tupiak. I had the pleasure of working for Chuck for approximately 18 years. He was a very generous employer. He was very faithful to his employees, making sure we were paid and paid on time. He was an astute investor. He was fearless in court. He was very faithful to his friends, as you've been hearing from everyone. He might be taking a nap on his couch, a phone call would come in, I'm in trouble, I need your help. He would jump up off the couch, jump in his car, tell me where he was going, and it was just instantaneous. He would go to court, make the phone calls, go to people's houses. He wasn't afraid where he was going. he would go anywhere, out of his way, all over the place to help people. He would, if a bill came in from a friend, Carl, whoever, make sure you pay this, pay it now. He'd put it in the box. An hour later, if the bill wasn't paid, you haven't paid this yet? I'll recall one incident that I had with Chuck. He was in an accident, broke his arm, broke his leg. We had to go to appellate court. My job was to carry the bags. His job was to walk on the crutches to get from the parking lot to the courtroom. It was a very wet, rainy, cold, winter Chicago day. Chuck was ahead of me. I kept yelling, "Chuck, be careful, be careful." He was fearless. He just kept walking along. I was slipping and sliding with the bags. I said, "Chuck, be careful." We got up to the courtroom. Everybody was being courteous to him because, of course, he was disabled. And it was his turn to stand and face the 3 appellate court justices, very prim and proper. And before long, he had the entire courtroom laughing, including the justices who kind of tried to stifle their laughs. Chuck won. Chuck won the case. And that's how I remember him, as being fearless, being faithful, being a very good man to work for. And I'm glad that Mary had his reception here because he was very proud of the University of Chicago, very proud of his family, his daughters, his grandchildren, his son-in-law, and he always gave Mary credit for the wonderful job she did in raising their 2 children. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jim Lasky. I think it's right that I would follow Mary. I had worked for Chuck for approximately 25 years. A lot of what I was going to say has already been said. But again, I started working for Chuck in 1978. And the one thing that Mary just said, and that I would like to amplify upon, is that he was intensely loyal, fiercely loyal to both his clients and to his employees. I have more than a few stories where if I had a problem in court or something, he'd back you up. He said, "You make the decision, I'm going to back you up." And especially when you're a young attorney starting out, that meant a lot to me. And so in closing, I would say that in the end, I would consider Chuck more of just a friend and an employer. And like I say, he also showed this loyalty to his clients, and he taught me that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sue Gorlitz. I've been a friend of Mary and Chuck's for about 22 years. I've known Mary through the travel industry, and that's how I met Chuck. I was one of those panic phone calls Mary alluded to earlier, calling Chuck at a time in my life that was very difficult. I needed legal advice immediately. Chuck was the one that I turned to. I didn't know what I would get in response as to whether he would refer me to another type of lawyer. But when I did call him, I told him my circumstances and that I needed legal advice immediately. The next thing I heard, he said to his secretary, "Hold all my calls." When a lawyer says that to their secretary, you know they're a good person and they're going to listen to you. And he did. And he helped me, and he always had a special place in my heart because of that. Last year, Chuck and I drove up to Michigan City for New Year's Eve, and Mary came in another car, and we had a chance, Chuck and I had a chance to talk one-on-one. We had a very enjoyable conversation, and I've always felt I've been able to bring out the best in Chuck. He and I have always gotten along extremely well.
We talked about how he got into law, and I also wanted to say how very proud he said to me of his children and how much he respected Mary in the way she brought them up. Thank you.
Wow, what can I say? I know a lot of people here have known Chuck much longer than I have known him. And I'm finding out things about my husband that I personally did not know. And I must say, I'm more proud of him now than I ever was. Thank you, Chuck. I know he's in here somewhere and he can hear this. Because this was his place. Hyde Park, University of Chicago, his Saiu brothers, his friends, my daughter's friends, my own friends. I thank you all for being here and paying tribute to Chuck. I prepared something to say, but it's all gone right now. So even my own notes right now don't make sense to me, but I'll do the best I can. It was a few years ago that Chuck retired, about 3 years ago. And I said to him, how would you feel if we followed our friends, the Nobles? We sold our pretty house and we moved to Florida with them. Or, if you don't like Florida, you don't like the hot weather, we can buy ourselves a pretty little place on some beautiful island in Greece. You can play all the tennis you want and you can do whatever you want. And he looks at me and he says, are you crazy? Am I going to leave my friends from the University of Chicago? Chicago is my roots. I'm not leaving the city. And I thought, well, I'm defeated. Okay, we'll stay in Chicago. Well, now I see what he means by friends. You really have to be very wonderful, good, loyal friends. And he was very loyal to you, too. I know Chuck was a teaser, and he teased a lot of his friends cruelly, without mercy. John, I was there when he teased you with no mercy, and I would go home and I'd say, how could you do this? How could you do this? He says, oh yes, but nobody else can. Only I can tease John. He was a true, loyal friend to all of you. All of you. I'm finding aspects of this man that I didn't know existed. However, I must have known, because when I first met him, he lived in South Chicago, and I lived all the way in Wilmette. And there's one representative from that era of my life, and that's Pat Braden Albieu. The family that I lived with in Wilmette had 6 children. Pat is one of them, and this was my first introduction to America. I lived with a family that was typically American, and I was in awe. A lovely husband, beautiful wife, 6 beautiful children, and I thought, this is what America is all about. And I had a wonderful beginning in America, thanks to Pat's family. After Chuck and I married, I would notice that he would wear beautifully expensive suits, beautifully custom-made shirts that we had made in Hong Kong, and then he would wear a 99-cent tie that we bought at Walmart. And I said, Chuck, you can't wear it. You must not wear this. He said, why not? I said, it's tasteless. It doesn't look right. It's polyester. It shows that you have no taste. And he would say to me, well, lady, I did wait 36 years to get married, and people would say I have no taste. I married you, didn't I? Well, from then on, I said, Charlie, you can wear your 99-cent ties and your 5-cent socks that we bought in Morocco. And by the way, there's a basket up front with about 50, 60 ties that I could not give away to the Salvation Army, because that's what I did a couple days ago. And I put all those ties in a basket. That 99-cent tie is there. However, there's some ties that cost close to $200. Please, gentlemen, feel free to take a memory and a souvenir from Chuck. You don't want to wear it, you can give it to your wife, she can wear it as a belt. You can put it on your Christmas tree, or if you have a pet, you can make it a leash. Please feel free to take those. Another thing that Chuck had a fetish about was alarm clocks. He was so afraid he's going to miss his court case in the morning. So he had alarm clocks. Wherever we traveled from, he would buy little alarm clocks. Chuck also had a hard time sleeping at night, so he would change beds every night and go from bedroom to bedroom. So every bedroom in our house had little alarm clocks. Those two I could not give to the Salvation Army. I've got them all over there. Please feel free to take an alarm clock. I also want to give tribute to my father, Daniel, whom I lost just a few weeks before Chuck died. My dad died a few days before Thanksgiving, and Chuck died a few days before Christmas. And if Chuck ever had a best friend, it was my father. That was the one person that my dad, my husband, never teased. There was a mutual respect, there was a mutual love, there was a mutual admiration between them. My dad, very few people know his history. As you know, we were Greeks from the Middle East. My father was born in Egypt. In one of his trips in the Middle East, in Palestine, he met my mother. This all happened right after the Second World War, and my father was a building contractor for the British Army in the Middle East. So wherever the British Army traveled, my father would follow them. He was a very successful contractor. He rubbed shoulders with Ben-Gurion, with Moshe Dayan, with King Abdullah of Transjordan. I understand I went to kindergarten with George Habash, and George Habash is one of the terrible people that caused the Achille Lauro incident. I understand I went to kindergarten with this person. He knew the Abu Ghosh family, which is a very famous Palestinian family. He knew Naguib. He knew Gamal Abdel Nasser. My father, as a child, was invited to King Farouk's wedding when he married Nariman. He was the Lawrence of Arabia, the Greek Lawrence of Arabia in the Middle East. His exploits are similar to Marco Polo in the Middle East. He really was a man that I want to remember. And his death, I had no time to mourn because he died just a few days before Chuck. My father was cremated, and what my sister and I wanted to do was take his cremations to Greece, but we're finding out because Greece does not accept cremation. So I don't know what we're going to do with my dad's ashes. But on the other hand, I'm thinking now of Chuck's ashes because he didn't want a full funeral. He said, cremate me. I said, well, what do I do with your ashes? He says, take them to Las Vegas, go over Caesar's palace. He says, because they will accept my ashes there. And just sprinkle them over Las Vegas. So if anybody here has a private claim, please let me know how I can go over to Las Vegas and sprinkle ashes. I think I know why my father died just a few weeks before Chuck. I think my dad went up to heaven. He saw how Chuck was suffering the last year in his life. He saw how myself, my two daughters, we were suffering. So my dad died, went up there, and he reached down and he plucked Chuck right out and took him up there with him. And I have a feeling the two of them are sitting up there discussing the Middle East, because my dad had all kinds of solutions for the Middle East. And they're also probably playing tennis, because in his youth my dad was quite a tennis player. And they're probably playing chess too. I lost two very lovely men in my life, very close to each other. But I'm also thankful to Chuck for giving me two beautiful daughters, a son-in-law to die for, and two beautiful little granddaughters. One of them is here. And I would like very much to ask my two daughters, my son-in-law, and my little Susanna to please come up here, because I want everybody to know what Chuck gave me. And I thank you very much.
And we have one more granddaughter who's not here. Thank you all. Thank you for coming. If there's food, please finish it off, drink, stay, and be merry. Thank you
I didn't even break down. I read my mother's eulogy and I didn't even break down. But I think that was for my...
That's my mother, and I have not broken out.
You know, that was for my whole... That was for my whole family. I remember my grandparents... I didn't think I would ever do that.